Sexton's poem "Oysters" was published in 1972 in the collection The Book of Folly. "Oysters" is written in free verse. It is constructed in one stanza of 23 lines, punctuated as 5 relatively middle-length sentences, and one long final sentence extending from lines 15 to 23. The lines vary in length from 4 syllables to 10. The poem is written in the first person I, though this is not evident until line 5. It is not revealed that the I is 15 years old until line 20, after the rite of passage has been established. Let's see the summary of the poem. The first line of the poem inverts the standard syntax or sentence structure, which would be "We ate oysters," to open with the word oysters, signaling their importance as an image within the context of the poem. Rather than presenting the oysters as food, the poet describes them as helpless small creatures. The adjective "sweet" in the second line is clearly not in reference to their taste, but in connection with the word babies. It must be used in its sense of deer. The strange characterization of their color as blue creates a startling image of death with the words babies. Lines 3 and 4 refer to the fact that raw oysters are typically served by the dozen, with lemon wedges and hot pepper sauce. The persona of the poem perceives them as round eyes tearing with the sour juice and hot sauce. Eating raw oysters is an acquired taste and usually not for children's supersensitive taste buds. In this poem, the persona associates this food with her adult father. The father's laugh is assumably at his child's dizziness. The sophisticated adult food being consumed is accompanied for the father by a sophisticated martini, obviously straight up rather than on the rocks, so that the clarity of the liquid in the glass is noticeable to the child, who associates it with the teary running of the oyster eyes as well as with some sadness. Line 9 refers to the sedative effect of the martini on the father, as well as describes the beginnings of the taste of the first oyster. Lines 10 to 13 suggest that the father and the daughter ate together and had a good time with some laughter together. Raw oysters are usually served circled on a plate with the lemon wedges and Tabasco in a dish in the middle. Evidently, the girl had first eaten the very top oyster, midnight or noon, and then went in an organized fashion from there. The poet in line 16 introduces herself retrospectively into the girl's experience to adamantly announce the death of childhood. The blue babies of line 2 were in one aspect of their multifaceted image function a forewarning of something dark and secret and sexual. Now we see them as a premonition of the death of the child in this young woman. However, the poet next places us in the restaurant and the situation seems unexceptional. But while the poem never returns to the level of the shock of the incest analogy in lines 10 to 13, there is still an ambivalence in the final lines. Line 22 can be read as a rite of passage as the child learns to begin to adjust her palate to adult food. But line 23 has a strange double meaning. It reads first, perhaps as though the woman in the persona has won out over the child, and the oysters were eaten to prove her adulthood. However, it also can mean that it is a woman now having dinner with a man and not a child having dinner with a father. And the phrase can be read as the woman was won, as in winning a romantic conquest. In this poem, and Sexton details an adolescent girl's transformation from innocence to adulthood through an account of a single meal eating oysters with her father. At first, a simple description of a father and daughter sharing a meal at a restaurant, the poem touches on important themes of sexual maturation and incest as the young speaker discovers the sexually charged implications of her actions. While change can be triggered by many catalysts, it seems here a single but profound realization that signals for the speaker the passing of childhood. This realization takes place as the speaker, sitting with her father, swallows the moist, salty oysters that came from the sea into my mouth. This challenge to eat the father food is so laden with sexuality, it embarrasses the father and daughter. They both laugh uncomfortably to cover their discomfort. To make sure both the speaker and reader agree exactly what change took place at that moment, Sexton pauses the scene to say, "And let me take note, there was a death, the death of childhood, there at the Union Oyster House. In every death there is rebirth, and in every defeat a side wins out. In this case, the woman won." Sexton concludes, though we know the opponents really inhabit the same body, like the shells that litter her plate after she devours the raw oysters inside, the young girl finishes the meal transformed by experience. The restaurant scene Sexton describes holds several characteristics of ceremony. The young girl invited into the adult world, the father challenging her to overcome her fear and eat the slimy and spicy oysters, and finally the act of eating, which places a part of the sea on her tongue like a sacrament. Through these actions, in turn, the 15-year-old girl leaves childhood behind and passes into the world of adults, suddenly a woman in her father's world. Underlying all these actions is an uncomfortable sense of sexuality between the father and daughter. As they eat the oysters, the act of sex itself is a rite of passage from inexperience to experience.